The clang of the heavy steel doors echoed to the halls of Red Rock Correctional Facility as Marcus Coach Carter took his first steps into the world he'd only ever seen on television. The air was thick with the scent of bleach, sweat, and something metallic that lingered in the back of his throat. He kept his head down, clutching the thin mattress and bundle of state-issued clothes, his broad shoulders hunched to make himself look smaller. At 52, Marcus was older than most of the men in the intake line. His hair peppered with gray, his face marked by the kind of scars that told stories no one wanted to hear. Prior to that, he had been a fighter, a coach, a mentor, and an MMA instructor with a reputation for discipline and respect. But none of that mattered here. In prison, all that counted was what you could prove, and Marcus had no intention of proving anything to anyone. He just wanted to serve his time and get out. The guards led him through a maze of corridors, past cells filled with men in orange jumpsuits, their eyes tracking his every move. Some nodded, others sneered, but most just watched, waiting to see how the new guy would handle himself. Marcus ignored them, focusing on the rhythm of his breathing, the steady beat of his heart. He'd been in tough spots before, cages, rings, back alleys, but this was different. Here, the rules were unwritten, the dangers hidden behind every smile and handshake. He was assigned to Block C, a unit known for its rough crowd and strict pecking order. The cell was small, barely big enough for the 2 bunks and the metal toilet in the corner. His cellmate, a wiry man named Luis, barely looked up from his book as Marcus entered. "Are you new?" Luis asked, his voice flat. Marcus nodded. "Name's Marcus." Luis grunted, turning a page. "Keep your head down. Don't talk to the white boys unless you have to. Don't sit at the wrong table in the chow hall, no matter what you do." Marcus thanked him, unpacked his few belongings, and lay on the bottom bunk, staring at the ceiling. He thought about his daughter, about the gym he'd lost, about the fight that had landed him here. It had been self-defense, but the jury hadn't seen it that way. Now, all that mattered was survival. The next morning, Marcus followed the flow of inmates to the chow hall, the noise rising as dozens of men jostled for position in line. He kept to himself, taking a tray of watery eggs and limp toast, and scanned the room for an empty seat. Most tables were already claimed. Latinos on one side, black inmates on another, whites in the back, their leader unmistakable. He was a mountain of a man, bald and tattooed, with a jaw like a cinder block and eyes that missed nothing. The others deferred to him, laughing at his jokes, moving aside when he passed. Marcus found a spot at the end of the black table, nodding politely to the men around him. He ate in silence, listening to the conversations, the coded language of men who'd learned to survive by saying little and watching everything. Halfway through his meal, a hush fell over the room. The white gang leader, everyone called him Tank, was making his rounds, flanked by 2 lieutenants. He stopped in front of Marcus, looking him up and down with a sneer. "You're the new guy," Tank said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Heard you used to be some kind of tough guy on the outside." Marcus didn't look up. "Just here to complete my work." Tank laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You hear that, boys? He's just here to do his time." The men at the table shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between Marcus and Tank. Without warning, Tank grabbed a cup of water from the table and poured it over Marcus's head, the cold liquid running down his face and soaking his shirt. "Don't have asterisk. CK with me next time, boy," Tank said, his voice low and dangerous. The room erupted in nervous laughter, but Marcus didn't react. He wiped his face with a napkin, finished his meal, and stood up, his movements calm and deliberate. He could feel the eyes on him, waiting to see if he'd fight back, but he kept his temper in check. He'd learned long ago that the first punch was never the most important. It was the last one that counted. As he walked back to his cell, Luis caught up with him. "Are you okay?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder. Marcus nodded. "I've been through worse." But inside, he knew this was just the beginning. In prison, respect was everything, and Tank had just marked him as a target. Marcus lay awake that night, listening to the sound of the block, the distant shouts, the clang of metal, the soft sobs of men who'd lost hope. He thought about his training, about the discipline that had carried him through a lifetime of fights. He wasn't here to make enemies, but he wouldn't be anyone's victim either. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd show them who he really was. Not with violence, but with strength, patience, and the quiet confidence of a man who'd already survived the worst the world had to offer. The next morning, Marcus woke before dawn, his body already tuned to the discipline of early training, and he quietly slipped from his bunk, careful not to disturb Luis. The cell block was still, the only sounds the distant hum of the ventilation and the occasional call from another cell. Marcus sank to the ground and began his routine, which consisted of slow, controlled push-ups, sit-ups, and other exercises meant to stretch and strengthen muscles that had become stiff over years of fighting and teaching. He moved with the silent grace of a man who knew his body well, every motion deliberate, every breath measured. Marcus had already washed, dressed, and had his mind clear and focused when the lights came on and the guards started their rounds. In the chow hall, the tension from the previous day still lingered, a subtle shift in the way the other inmates watched him, some with curiosity, others with a wary respect. Marcus took his tray and sat at the same table as before, nodding to men around him but keeping his eyes on his food. From across the room, he could feel Tank's gaze, the big man's presence acting like a storm cloud waiting to break. As Marcus ate, one of the younger inmates, a wiry kid named Jamal, leaned over and whispered, "You handled yourself good yesterday, OG." Most guys would have lost it. Marcus shrugged, not looking up. Sometimes not moving at all is the best move. Jamal grinned, nodding in agreement, and the others at the table seemed to relax a little, the unspoken bond of shared experience drawing them closer. But the peace was short-lived. Tank and his crew approached, their boots thudding against the concrete floor, and the table fell silent. Tank loomed over Marcus, his arms crossed, tattoos rippling beneath his sleeves. "You believe you're superior to us, old man," he sneered, his voice low and menacing. Marcus looked up, meeting Tank's eyes with a calm, steady gaze. "I don't think I'm better than anyone. I just want to eat my breakfast." Tank laughed as he grabbed Marcus's tray and set it on the ground. "Then you can eat it off the ground." The room held its breath, waiting for Marcus to explode, but he simply stood, picked up the tray, and began cleaning the mess, his movements slow and deliberate. The guards watched from the sidelines, their faces unreadable, and Tank laughed, turning to his crew. "See? He knows his place." But as Marcus finished cleaning, he straightened and looked Tank in the eye. "You got something to prove? Do it in the yard. Otherwise, leave me alone." The challenge hung in the air, and for a moment, Tank seemed taken aback, his bravado faltering. But he quickly recovered, shoving Marcus aside and stalking off, his crew following close behind. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine, work detail, roll call, the endless monotony of prison life. But word of the confrontation spread quickly. By evening, Marcus had become something of a legend, the story of a new guy who stood up to Tank growing with each retelling. Some inmates approached him with respect, others with caution, but all seemed to recognize that Marcus was not a man to be trifled with. That night, as he lay in his bunk, Luis turned to him and whispered, "You know he's not going to let this go, right?" Marcus nodded, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. "I know, but I'm not here to fight. I just want to do my time." Luis sighed, his voice heavy with worry. "Tank runs this place. If you don't stand up to him, he'll never stop." Marcus closed his eyes, remembering the lessons he'd taught his students over the years, about discipline, about respect, about knowing when to fight and when to walk away. He knew that violence would only lead to more violence, but he also knew that sometimes a man had to defend himself, not just for his own sake, but for the sake of those who looked up to him. The next day, in the yard, Tank made his move. Surrounded by his crew, he cornered Marcus near the weight benches, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You think you're tough, old man? Let's see what you got." Marcus stood his ground, his posture relaxed but ready, his eyes never leaving Tank's. The crowd gathered, the tension crackling in the air, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Tank lunged, swinging a heavy fist, but Marcus sidestepped with the ease of a seasoned fighter, his movements fluid and controlled. He didn't strike back, not yet, but his message was clear. He was not afraid. The crowd murmured, the balance of power shifting ever so slightly, and Tank, Frustrated, spat on the ground and stormed off, his authority challenged in front of everyone. Marcus knew it wasn't over, but he also knew he'd taken the first step toward earning the respect he needed to survive. As the sun set over the prison yard, Marcus felt a sense of calm settle over him. He was still a long way from freedom, but for the first time since his arrival, he felt like he had a fighting chance. Days passed, and the story of Marcus's quiet defiance spread through every corner of Red Rock Correctional Facility, morphing into legend as it traveled from cell to cell, whispered in the laundry room, recounted in the showers, and debated over dominoes in the rec room. The older inmates nodded with approval, recognizing the rare blend of patience and strength Marcus displayed, while the younger ones watched him with a mix of awe and curiosity, eager to see what would happen next. Tank, meanwhile, grew more agitated with each passing day, his authority eroding as the other inmates began to question his dominance. He lashed out at his own crew, picking fights over minor slights, but the more he tried to reassert control, the more it slipped through his fingers. Marcus kept his routine, rising early to exercise, helping Luis with his reading, and offering quiet advice to anyone who asked. Despite the fact that he never boasted about his past or the titles he had won, or the years he had spent training fighters, word got out anyway. Jamal, the wiry kid from the chow hall, started shadowing Marcus during yard time, peppering him with questions about fighting and self-defense. At first, Marcus was reluctant to get involved, but he saw something of himself in Jamal, a hunger for discipline, a need for guidance, and he began teaching the basics, how to stand, how to breathe, how to move with purpose. Soon, a small group of inmates joined them, eager to learn, and Marcus found himself running impromptu training sessions in the corner of the yard, his students hanging on his every word. The guards watched with mild amusement, grateful for anything that kept the peace, and even some of the rival gangs took notice, sending their own to learn from the old man. For a while, it seemed as if Marcus had found a way to carve out a place for himself, to turn his sentence into something meaningful. But Tank was not finished. One afternoon, as Marcus was leading a group through a series of drills, Tank and his crew approached, their faces set in grim determination. The yard fell silent, the other inmates backing away to form a loose circle around the confrontation. Tank stepped forward, his fists clenched, his eyes burning with rage. "You think you can take my spot, old man? You think you can turn my crew against me?" Marcus shook his head, his voice calm. "I'm not here to take anything from you, Tank. I'm just trying to get through my time." Tank sneered, spitting at Marcus's feet. "You're making me look weak. That can't stand." Without warning, Tank lunged, swinging a wild punch at Marcus's head. However, Marcus was prepared. He slipped the punch with ease, his body moving on instinct, and countered with a quick, controlled strike to Tank's midsection, enough to knock the wind out of him, but not enough to do real harm. Tank staggered back, gasping for air, and Marcus stepped in, grabbing him by the wrist and twisting gently, forcing him to his knees. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Marcus leaned in, his voice low but clear. "This doesn't have to go any further. Let it go." For a moment, it seemed as if Tank might fight back, but the pain in his wrist and the humiliation of being bested in front of everyone was too much. He nodded, and Marcus released him, stepping back to give him space. Tank rose slowly, his face red with anger and shame, but he didn't attack again. Instead, he turned and walked away, his crew following in silence. The yard erupted in whispers, the inmates exchanging glances as they tried to process what they'd just seen. Marcus returned to his group, resuming the lesson as if nothing had happened, but he could feel the shift in the air. He had proven himself, not just as a fighter, but as a leader, a man who commanded respect without demanding it. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the prison changed. The violence that had once been a daily occurrence began to subside, replaced by a cautious sense of order. Inmates from different backgrounds started talking, sharing stories, and even working out together under Marcus's guidance. The guards took notice, and for the first time in years, the warden called a meeting to commend the inmates for their improved behavior. Marcus knew that peace in prison was always fragile, always temporary, but he took pride in what he'd accomplished. He had come to Red Rock as a stranger, an outsider, but he had found a way to make a difference, to lead his mark in a place where hope was often in short supply. And as he lay in his bunk at night, listening to the quiet hum of the cell block, Marcus allowed himself to dream the day he would walk free, not just as a survivor, but as a man who would help others find their own strength. As the weeks turned into months, Marcus's influence in Red Rock Correctional Facility grew in ways he never could have anticipated, and the lessons he shared began to ripple outward, changing not just the men he trained, but the very culture of the prison itself. The morning routines he led in the yard became a fixture, drawing men from every background, Black, Latino, white, Asian, each one eager to learn, to sweat, to find a sense of purpose in a place designed to strip it away. Even the guards, once wary of any gathering that might hint at trouble, came to appreciate the order and discipline Marcus instilled. Fights became rare, and when they did break out, it was often Marcus or one of the students who stepped in to de-escalate, using words and presence rather than fists. The warden, a stern woman named Ms. Alvarez, called Marcus into her office one afternoon, her expression unreadable as she gestured for him to sit. "I've been in this job a long time, Carter," she said, folded her hands on the desk, "and I've never seen a block turn around like this. You've got a gift. I want you to keep using it." Marcus nodded, humbled by the recognition, but he made it clear he wasn't looking for special treatment. "I just want to do my time, ma'am. Help where I can." She smiled, a rare softness in her eyes. "You're helping more than you know." Word of Marcus's story even reached the outside world, thanks to a local reporter who'd been following the prison's declining violence statistics. The article painted Marcus as a reluctant hero, a man who brought hope to a hopeless place, and letters began to arrive. Former students, old friends, even strangers who'd read about his journey and wanted to thank him for making a difference. Marcus read each one carefully, drawing strength from their words, and shared them with his group, reminding them that change was possible even here. Tank, meanwhile, had changed as well. The humiliation of his defeat had stung, but over time, he came to respect Marcus, recognizing in him a strength that went beyond fists and fury. One day, Tank approached Marcus in the yard, his posture less confrontational, his voice quieter. "You got a minute?" he asked. The two men sat on a bench with the weight of their shared history between them after Marcus gave his nod. "I was wrong about you," Tank admitted, staring at the ground. "I thought respect came from fear, but you showed me something different." Marcus listened, offering no judgment, and Tank continued, "I want to learn. Not just fighting, how to be better, for when I get out." It was a moment Marcus would never forget, a reminder that even the hardest men could change if given the chance. He agreed to help, and over the following weeks, Tank became one of his most dedicated students, his transformation inspiring others to follow suit. The prison administration took notice, expanding Marcus's program and allowing him to mentor new arrivals, teaching them not just how to defend themselves, but how to find dignity and purpose in a place that offered little of either. As his release date approached, Marcus felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety. He had grown to care for the men he'd trained, to see them not as criminals but as brothers, each one fighting his own battle. On his last night, the men gathered in the yard, forming a circle around Marcus as he spoke. "You all have something inside you that no one can take away," he said, his voice steady. "Strength, discipline, respect. Remember that, no matter what happens." The next morning, as he walked through the gates and into the sunlight, Marcus felt the weight of the past lift from his shoulders. He was free, not just in the prison, but from the anger and regret that had haunted him for years. He knew the world outside would have its own challenges, but he was ready. He had survived Red Rock, not by being the toughest or the loudest, but by being true to himself, by lifting others up instead of tearing them down. And as he stepped into his new life, Marcus carried with him the knowledge that even in the darkest places, hope could take root, and a single act of courage could change everything.